Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abby Hissong, and I will be the moderator for tonight's proceedings. First and foremost, I'd like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank everyone who helped to make this evening possible. I'd like to thank Union Township and the Village of West Milton for hosting this event and the candidates for making time out of their busy schedules to be here tonight. And I'd also like to thank all the community members in attendance. I would like to take this opportunity to review the rules for tonight's proceedings. A reminder to all that this is in fact a Meet the Candidates night and is not a debate. There will be no opportunity for a rebuttal given. There will be 7 questions asked this evening ranging in a variety of topics. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer the question to the best of their ability. We will begin this evening by allowing each of the candidates to introduce themselves. We will introduce ourselves from left to right, starting with Ms. Samples.
Governor running alongside Congressman in the Senate for the state of Ohio. We are running a campaign, hashtag Power to Be the People. We believe that our residents want a government that not only looks like them, but does the things that they expect of them. We are running a campaign on Medicare for all, Jobs Not Jail, $15 minimum wage increase, and public schools that work for all of our children. These are things that are essential to the progress of our state and for each neighborhood to not be left behind. I think sometimes our candidates focus on the big cities and they forget about our small areas. And it's important that we make sure no one is forgotten in the process as we run this race. Again, Medicare for all, Jobs Not Jail, $15 minimum wage increase, and free 2-year college and trade schools for our young people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Or just an intro?
Yes. Just an intro.
Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Guyette. I'm from Greenville, Ohio. I'm currently running for the Democratic nomination to challenge Warren Davidson in November for the U.S. Congress seat for the 8th Congressional District of Ohio. Looking forward to talking to you and answering some questions tonight. You can check out my website at guyetteforcongress.com. From there you can check out my Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, send me a message, whatever you like to do. Okay? Nice to meet you.
Good evening to all. My name is Ted Jones, and I live here in Miami County. In fact, I just live and work here in Springfield Township, near Pickle, Ohio. I'm also glad for the opportunity to be here to address everyone and to hear the questions that everyone has. It's very important to me that I get as much input as possible because it helps me formulate some ideas. And as I travel around the county and around our district, I get the benefit of hearing what you're saying, and I understand some of the concerns that you have. So again, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy that you're here, and thank you very much.
Hey folks, I'm Melissa Atkinson. I'm running for the United States Senate on the Republican ticket. I'm a small business owner, born and raised on the west side of Columbus. I was featured with the Trump administration in 2017 on matters related to health care reform. I am campaigning for the pro-life movement, pro-Second Amendment, smaller government, and American exceptionalism. And it's great to be with all of you tonight. I love the bipartisan panel up here. It feels good. And thank you for coming out this evening.
I grew up originally in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm the son of a conservative mother and a liberal father, and I learned very early on that it's not so much whether it's an R or D next to your name. It's about the compassion and your focus on getting things done. And you know, that's what my focus is going to be when I move to Columbus and represent you, and that's what I would like to do. And I graduated from the University of Dayton, and I spent about 6 years working for Senator Sherrod Brown as his regional rep for Southwest Ohio. And currently I work at Antioch University as their Director of Government Relations. And throughout all those experiences, again, to me, what I understand more than anything else about what a politician and what an elected official should be is a public servant. And that means that you have to be somebody who is going to be invested in the communities in which you represent. That means that you have to be somebody who's going to connect with your constituents and represent their voice in Columbus. And you know, sometimes I think that that's lost a little bit, and whether that's in state government or in the federal level, in both parties. And that's something I aim to focus on. That's something that I promised you I will do. And that certainly is why I'm excited to be here today talking to all of you. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm George Lovett from Tip City, and I'm running for state representative. I'd like to thank all of you in the audience for coming out here tonight. I'd like to thank the organizers for putting on this event, and I'd like to thank all of you for watching. I learned a long time ago when you're confused about something, you ought to ask questions. So I've got a question for our organizers here. I'm kind of confused. Are we doing a 2-minute opening statement here, or is this something different? Okay, well, are we doing the 2-minute opening statement later on, or? Okay, well, once again, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Let me explain, I'm not an ordinary, normal establishment kind of guy. When I was 8 years old, my parents bought a bait store, and I started working there immediately. I literally sold minnows and worms to pay my way through college. When I came to Miami County, a couple of wonderful things happened. One, I became a father. My daughter's 23. She's out in LA chasing her dream to be a screenwriter. The second thing is I started a law firm today that has 4 offices, and we've helped thousands of people with their estate planning, trust, probate, and nursing home planning. I was on Tip City Council for 8 years, I was mayor for 2 years, and I've served on over a dozen nonprofits to make our place a better place to live and work. The opioid crisis is our #1 problem. We're losing 14 young people a day in this state to drug overdoses. These are our children and grandchildren. One Wellness Place is an initiative we've got on the Tri-County Board that will put under one roof all the services addicts need to recover, and we estimate it's going to save over $200,000 a year in operating costs. This is the creative, cost-saving, conservative type of approach that I wish to take to Columbus. Faith and hard work are my foundation and are our values, and that's what I want to take to Columbus to represent all of you. Thank you very much.
Good evening, I'm Ryan, and I'm here tonight. I'm running for the 80th District State Representative position, and I'm a home. West Milton was my home. It's where I grew up. I'm proud to say my mother still lives on Wagner Road, where I grew up. She's here tonight. Thank you, Mom. And my wife is also here, Kim, who I will be married to as of tomorrow for 32 years. So looking forward to tomorrow. Growing up in West Milton, first of all, it was a great childhood, but I grew up in a blue-collar house. My dad worked for General Motors, and to make ends meet, he worked 7 days a week, a lot, and did the best he could. And splurging for us was getting a dilly bar at the Dairy Queen in those days. And then once we all got into school, my mom started doing different jobs. She worked in the cafeteria at the high school and delivered papers for the Dayton Daily News, and eventually worked at Patterson Florist, who many of you who are from West Milton have probably seen her there. Lessons you learn when you grow up in West Milton: first of all, having the family that I did, you learn how to work hard. I started my first job mowing grass and delivering newspapers for the West Milton Record, and worked my way up. And Dad and Mom always said, show up early and stay late if they'll let you, and do your job and be a team member. And I've lived those lessons all my life. One of the special things that happened to me growing up in West Milton is I was a Boy Scout. Troop 60 here, Jerry Pinkerton was my scoutmaster, and I became an Eagle Scout. I'm proud to say both my sons are Eagle Scouts. Learned valuable life skills as a scout. Upon graduation from Milton Union High School in 1981, I made it to Wright State University, where I graduated in 1985. And I look forward to talking to all of you and letting you know how I feel tonight. I'm your county commissioner now in my 3rd term, and I look forward to asking for your vote on May 8th in the Republican primary.
Awesome. Awesome. So years ago, there was a group of siblings that set up in Coates Construction. So if you guys are familiar with Coates Construction, there was a group of siblings that set up every single summer and sold produce every Thursday for the summer. They were earning enough money so that they could pay their way through college. My name is Jenna Powell, and I was one of those siblings. I now co-own and manage the fastest growing outdoor billboard company in the Midwest. We work with in over 25 counties. I own over 340 billboard faces, and I work with hundreds of small businesses across the state. I learned so much here in this community about entrepreneurship, hard work, and just innovation. I'm thrilled to be running for state representative in this community. For years in this community, we've hired the same kind of people for state representative. We've hired bureaucrats and politicians. And unfortunately, we've seen that that's gotten us higher taxes, more regulation, and an opioid crisis. I am thrilled to be running for state representative to fight against high taxes, to fight against just a surplus of regulations, and to fight for our community. Thank you so much. My name is Jenna Powell, and I look forward to chatting with you all.
My name is J.D. Winteregg. I live over in Troy, Ohio with my beautiful wife and lovely son. I messed this up a couple forums ago. Called him my beautiful son and my wife. So I'm just clarifying, my wife is absolutely beautiful and I love her. My grandmother actually grew up in this area. She's a graduate from Milton. I grew up down the road in Inglewood. I'm a Northmont grad. My wife grew up in Tip City. She was a valedictorian there, obviously smarter than me. So if you have any concerns about my ability to sell myself, just look at her. I'm a former teacher. I work at a grain elevator. I actually work at Rudy Incorporated. So any of you from here know that Rudy's is just downtown. I actually work at the Covington branch, but I know a lot of the farmers and have had the opportunity to work with them and help them with their marketing of their grain. I got into this whole thing because I was working on a PhD at Ohio State. I was teaching teachers to teach. And they were telling me my role as a teacher was not to impart knowledge to kids, but create activists for social justice. And for me, it was completely contrary to my values. They told us social justice was anything defined that could take apart our capitalist system that had been so oppressive and their drivers, and among them were the Christian family unit. And I realized I was the only guy in that classroom who thought that was off. And I made it a vow at that time to fight against that. It's pervasive in our schools. It's pervasive in our communities. And I don't want that for us here in Miami County. What we've seen now in Columbus is leadership on the Republican side that doesn't understand how to fight this. It's been intruding. We've expanded Medicaid. It's bankrupting our state. We've been pushing Democratic policies, and what we have is people who run with these check marks of conservatism and govern like Democrats. I know my values. I know how to fight the other side, and I ask that you look beyond the check marks and see who the best fighter for this is, and that's why I'm asking for your vote come May 8th.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Vanessa Enoch, and I am a Democratic candidate for U.S. Congress. This is actually my first time in West Milton, so it's good to be here. It's good to meet all of you. I am a 15-year resident of the 8th District of Ohio, and I'm also a Buckeye, born and bred. I was raised in a good Christian household where I learned values such as do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. I also grew up in a union household, and I'm a first-generation college graduate, and with the loss of my husband in 2009, I've raised my two daughters by myself, and put one of them through college, and I have one more to go that's back there in the back of the room. So I understand the struggle of the real struggle of families, and especially with regard to trying to ensure that our kids have a quality education. My legislative priorities are education from preschool to college, healthcare for all, and economic development and job creation. The cost of education is already through the roof, and this current administration is making things much difficult for our children to be able to gain an education. So I'm running for U.S. Congress because I want to give voters a real choice for change this year. There's never been a woman to represent the 8th District in the U.S. Congress, and the lack of women's representation is a significant problem. Because the fact of the matter is, when there is substantive women's representation, then legislation that supports women and children gets passed. So last year alone, over 20 bills died on the floor before they ever had an opportunity to go to a vote. And so consider the fact that in the 8th District, 63% of those living in poverty are adult women. My doctorate degree is in public policy and social change. I have a master's degree in business, and I want to use my education and experience to ensure that we bring responsible government to the U.S. Congress. Again, my name is Doc Enoch, and I'm asking for your vote on May 8th in the Democratic primary. Thank you.
Thank you all. We'll begin tonight's round with our first question, which will address education policy. Mr. O'Brien, this question will start with you. What is your position on education, both in terms of Ohio high school standards, such as Common Core, and in terms of financial costs for both primary, secondary, along with vocational and college tuition?
Thank you, Abby. First of all, my wife, Kim, is a public school teacher. She's taught elementary school for this her 32nd year. So, and all my kids went to public school. I believe all parents should have choices for where they send their kids. If they're in a failing school district, they should have the option to put them with whichever school system or school type they prefer. One of the reasons I'm running is I've seen my wife's job change drastically over the 32 years. In the beginning, there weren't a lot of regulations and paperwork and testing that were forced down from the state onto our local schools. And every year seems like she's been a teacher, that's gotten worse and worse. So one of my goals as a legislator is to bring local control back to our education system, give the local control to our school boards, to our administration, to our teachers and our parents to decide how best it is to teach our children so that they're successful for the future. As far as funding goes, funding is a difficult question. The funding formula is there in the state. And I haven't looked at it exactly, to be frank, and that's the kind of guy I am. If I haven't looked at something, I'll let you know. And if I don't know, I will tell you I don't know. But in our urban school districts, it costs them a lot more to educate one pupil than it does in West Milton or Tip City. So that inequity has to be looked at. As far as Common Core goes, I think it should be left up to the locals. If the local school district wants to impose Common Core, they can do that. If they don't want to, they shouldn't have to. And that's been my stance all along. Too much control has been taken away from our local school districts, and I will fight that every day that I have to in Columbus.
Thank you. Ms. Powell?
So, to tell you guys a little bit about myself, I was homeschooled for quite a few years. Then after that, I did College Credit Plus through Franklin Monroe. So I graduated from Franklin Monroe. I understand, and I believe in, I understand the need of parental choice in school districts that are for the students. I had the opportunity to, my parents knew that I wanted to start my own business. So I was able to start business classes when I was 13 years old. I see the need of parents and local districts, having one size does not fit all for every student. Every student is different and deserves the chance to have a tailored education to them. I am adamantly against Common Core. Common Core takes away the power from the local school districts and the parents and gives more power to the state. And unfortunately, we see that left and right. More power being taken away from parents and local school districts and given to someone farther away. We believe in the American dream here. We understand that, if a child wants to achieve something, they can. And that comes with great education. We have some of the best schools and the best teachers here in this area. So what I will do as a state representative is I will do everything I can to give power back to the local school districts, back to parents, and take it away from the state and give it back to the local.
Thank you. Mr. Lovett.
Thank you very much. Let's start with the easier thing first. We need to give more flexibility to local school boards to decide how they want to educate their youngsters. We've seen a mess in the Ohio Department of Education the last few years trying to set standards like Common Core and park testing and just helter-skelter all over the place. We need to get to some stability, and we look to our local school boards to help provide that. The next thing is funding. There's no quick, simple, easy solutions here. About 20 years ago, the Ohio Supreme Court had a case called DeRolf that found our whole funding mechanism was fatally flawed. We still haven't fixed it. We've got to look at it, engage more, and decide how we're going to fix it together. Bricks and mortar versus online learning is our big challenge today. The internet is bringing things to us with a lot more velocity and flexibility. We need to be more flexible and understanding in our educational policy. Some youngsters work better online at home. Others work better in the classroom. We need to do a better job earlier finding out which setting works best for our youngsters and provide them and their parents more and better choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winteregg.
So like I said, I'm a former teacher. I've actually lived and worked in France in a socialist system in their education system. And I've seen kind of where they're pushing us as far as having a statewide curriculum where you're supposed to teach this thing on this day that hamstrings teachers. And we're moving that way now. Part of the reason I got out of education was because I thought I could fight it better from the outside than on the inside. I've worked in urban, suburban, and rural settings. I've seen how the funding is tied into test scores. And the problem is we have politicians in Columbus who have never set foot in a public school classroom who understand how any of this is done. And they put a quantitative measure on how to assess kids and teachers when we're qualitative human beings. We need to, the way we assess our students and teachers, we need to look at that with qualitative measures and not tie it into funding, frankly. There are several funding bills, or there's at least one main one right now, the Brenner bill, where they want to run all the funding through the state and then redistribute per student so the student can choose. And while that sounds good, practically speaking, having worked in an urban school, you see that that really doesn't give the opportunities to the urban populations that it does to the white populations. Schools can still say no to students. And while practically that sounds good, functionally it doesn't happen. So funding-wise, there are a lot of issues that we need to look at. Constitutionally, our Ohio Constitution says we have to provide equal funding for every student, and we haven't achieved that. Frankly, I don't know how to do that yet, but I want to go in there and look and kind of stir that up and see what we can do to push towards something that's more equitable. As far as the standards go, we need to be hyper-local with the standards, particularly when you look at the testing. Nothing is culturally relevant with the testing. You know, a farm kid shouldn't be taking the same test as a city kid. We need to get the businesses involved so our kids are developing the skills they need to go out and find the work they need if they choose to do that and not push them through this college system that we're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley.
So I personally believe that access to quality public education is the best way we can level the playing field for our kids. And right now we are utterly failing across the board in Ohio to provide that same quality education to every single student. And you know, as far as that funding mechanism goes, you know, it has been ruled unconstitutional multiple times. This is something that I think is basically the reasoning is that it's mostly tied to property tax rates, and there's some inequity in there inherently when you look at property tax rates. You know, in a community like Dayton versus a community like West Milton, those are going to be different. I do believe that more local input, and specifically more school board input and more teacher input, is how we can better create a system that is effectively teaching our kids. And right now, you know, if you look at a school district like my community here in Dayton, we have 70% of our kids who aren't graduating from college. And so if our goal, and what a school district's goal has to be, is not just to educate that kid while he's until he's 18 and then we're done with him. No, the goal has to be to help that kid, whether they want to go to college, that's great, but if they don't, we also have to be preparing them for the workforce too. And so I think that, you know, if we tie education and workforce development hand in hand together, we are addressing some of those issues. I would love to see more pre-apprenticeship type programs and more workforce training development programs in our schools, entrepreneurship programs in our schools. I think those are the type of things that we can access and things that we can work across the board on. I truly believe that, again, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. In your community, your school is a part of your lifeblood. It's part of the anchor for your community, and it's something that you truly care about and are invested in. And until we're doing a better job in providing those resources to our students, we are failing, and we have to do better. And I'm looking forward to working on that in Columbus. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson.
You know, I'm in alignment, quite frankly, with many of the things that this young man just said, and I look at education much differently. Number one, this is a federal level position. However, given the fact that I didn't pursue a 4-year college pathway and that I went into the corporate world utilizing homeschooling opportunities, utilizing mentorship opportunities, and utilizing vocational opportunities, I was highly successful without obtaining ridiculous amounts of debt for a college degree. And so as the Republican running for the U.S. Senate, I was the only candidate that actually went down to meet with the Democratic arm of the teachers union, which is the Ohio Education Association. I specifically used my own life as an example of where we had the ability to look at vocational programs, the skills gaps that we have in Ohio, apprenticeship programs, and other skills and situational-based training programs. In the private sector, I was a human resources professional, so I understand the labor and job markets much more deeply than any other candidate who seeks your vote. The gap that we have right now in Ohio with our labor participation pools are significantly based upon the fact that we are sending kids out of high school unprepared for the workforce. A 4-year or even a 2-year degree truly is not for anyone, and I would like us to start looking at mentorship programs, skills-based programs, local decision level making, and funding that teachers can accessibly utilize for equal education.
Thank you. Ms. Sample?
Thank you. I think we first have to examine, we always talk about no child left behind. We have to examine first what has worked and what hasn't worked for our children. When we talk about Common Core, state standards, and testing, it's not working, so what do we do to fix it? Not all children learn the same. So when you have a model within the school system that becomes testing, when you have a child that's already struggling and they're not a good test taker, you've now created another barrier for that child. And I think we first have to start in the classroom. First, we have to get rid of the testing, because again, all the children do not learn the same. And then we also have to make sure we look at the funding source, making sure that our children don't have price tags on them as they travel through the system, whether public, private, or charter. I mean, I think that's what has become of our educational system. It's become about money over the children. And I think we first have to make sure that we restore that model to making sure that we really don't leave children behind, but we also need to make sure that we return that control to local school boards and making sure that we keep our state school board in place. It absolutely has to stay in place, and we need to give the power back to them so they can actually set a model that will work for all children, regardless of where they live at. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Enoch?
It's Dr. Enoch, no offense, but as someone who attended Catholic schools as well as public schools, I actually have a respect for both Catholic schools, or for private schools and public education. The one thing I will say is that I'm not an advocate for taking money out of public schools. I think that just as my parents paid for my private education when they had the resources to do so, that individuals who want to send their kids to private schools still have that option and that opportunity. However, I've lived in a third world country where there was no access to public education. And where there is a lack of public education, it is the girls who tend to suffer the most. And so I would say we want to protect our public school system. We want to make sure we strengthen it. Just as Mr. Bradley said, we need to ensure that our public school system, no matter where a child goes to school, that they still have the same equal access to a quality public education, that someone who lives in a suburb like I live in our children don't have a better opportunity to get a good education than a child who lives in the inner city or on a farm. I think ECOT is a good example of what happens when private entities take over education. You get abuses in the system. So I think we need to be careful and cognizant of things like that. And I think that's pretty much the entire question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. I just have a couple quick thoughts on that. There hasn't been a teacher that I've talked to recently that's in favor of Common Core. They all want to bring that control back into local school districts, and I'm a firm believer of that. I also believe in some guidelines so our students can compete on a world market. We are in a global economy, and that's where our education needs to be focused, to be competitive in that global market. When you look at the statistics regarding private schools and public schools, the results are pretty close. And all I would say to that is that if we have private schools that are not making the grade for whatever reason, that those schools should be closed and those students be returned to public schools, and the funding that goes with that returned to the public schools as well. A couple other thoughts that I had regarding higher education. Those of us that have put children through school know what the cost is. Those of us that have college graduate degrees know what the cost of that is. And we have to do something about that. The high cost of education with graduate students now, you know, they're looking at years and years of college debt. I know it was several years before my youngest daughter was able to pay off some of her debt. So there's a couple of things I'd like to do on the federal level. And that would be introduce legislation to maximize the Pell Grants. I would suggest that we possibly go to $100,000 with terms of payback over a 15-year period. And I would also like to see community colleges also offer baccalaureate degrees. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Guyette.
You know, our children are our greatest resource because they represent the future. If we're not doing a good enough job preparing our children for the jobs and the challenges they're going to face in the future of our country's going to fall further behind. Our state is going to fall behind. You know, there was a time where we led the world in education. And in fact, this part of the country was known for a particular federal legislation that used money from land sales to build a small school in each township. And this was a revolutionary thing at the time because in the early 1800s, only wealthy people went to school. And the notion that a country would devote its resources to educating everyone instead of saying, you're worthy to be educated, you're not, that was a revolutionary thing. We led the world at that time. I'd like to see us get back there. I think all of us agree on what I've just said, that children are the future and it's very valuable, but where we disagree sometimes is in the details. I think it's very dangerous, as my colleague Vanessa said, to start taking money away from public schools. It's almost like giving up. It's almost like saying, well, there's nothing more we can do. We're frustrated with dealing with teachers' unions. The schools are getting older. There are these people in the private sector that want to offer charter education, and it's going to be cheaper, and it's going to be better, and it's going to be all new and improved. But unfortunately, that takes money and bleeds money away from the public school system, upon which most people depend. I'd also like to see, you know, I think there's been a lot of focus on training people for jobs, and that is an important part of education. But I also think we're losing focus of the value of critical thinking. A big part of education is training people to how to confront the problems they'll face in life and how to be good citizens. You know, how to participate in democracy, how to make informed decisions about current events and vote and participate in elections.
Thank you. The next topic will be about gun control. Mr. Lovett, this question will start with you. What is your position on gun control, and perhaps your interpretation of the Second Amendment, and as a follow-up to the first question, in terms of school safety?
I've owned firearms since before I had a driver's license. I grew up in a bait store and a gun shop. I learned how to handle firearms before I ever went to high school, and I've got many firearms. I haven't bought a single one myself. My dad gave them all to me. The Second Amendment guarantees each individual the right to bear arms. This notion that it's a group right has me kind of perplexed. Groups are made up as individuals. Individuals use the firearms. I don't see how it's any other way. We all have that right. It's a Second Amendment right. It's enshrined in our amendments just like all the other amendments are in our Constitution. It's a precious right. When we have a tragedy like Parkland or Columbine or any of the other assortment of horrible tragedies with public shootings, the knee-jerk immediate reaction is do something, which it should be. But what we shouldn't do is go into misguided areas in which we try to politicize the issue. What we need to do is try to suck the politics out of the problem. And I would point out there's two specific places where they have a lot of firearms and they don't have these problems, or they have corrected a problem. First of all, the U.S. Postal Service used to have a big problem with disgruntled employees coming into the workplace and shooting it up. They don't have that problem anymore. Why? We need to look at it harder and see what exactly they did to solve the problem. The second thing is, the country of Israel has an extremely high percentage of firearm ownership and usage. They don't have these problems. What do they do differently? Instead of trying to politicize this problem, let's look at it objectively and figure out what the problem is and try to solve it that way. There's 300 million firearms in this country. You will never, ever get rid of them. We need to live with them, and it's part of our heritage. That's what we need to do here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wintereg.
I always joke with my friends, the only gun control I support is a tight grouping. I don't think, look, the Second Amendment is a God-given right, and it's not up to man to strip us of our right to protect ourselves. And I firmly stand with that. And like I said, I've lived and worked in a socialist country where gun control is pervasive and gun ownership is low. And in France, you see the same thing happening. Bataclan, the shooting with the illegal guns there. And down in Nice, you saw a guy with a truck run over groups of people. It's a heart issue. It's not a gun issue. And the problem is we've got a heart issue in America as well, with families that have been taken apart by this government intervention. So my stance is this is a God-given right. It's not our right to take that away from anybody. If you look at schools, I worked in Dayton Public, and we had metal detectors going in, and I haven't seen a school shooting at an urban school. This is happening in suburban schools. Schools can decide for themselves, the districts can decide for themselves how they want to address this issue, and I firmly stand by that. But we need to look at what we're doing as a state, taking away the resources from our local areas, from our districts, that hinder their ability to protect our students.
Thank you. Ms. Powell.
So our Constitution is the cornerstone of America. We understand and we know that protecting our Second Amendment rights is crucial. We know that I grew up shooting guns on a farm with my dad and my brothers, and shooting is not only guns are not only for recreation and hunting, but we see in the Constitution, we see in the Second Amendment that it says if the government gets too big and tries to take away our freedoms and liberties, God forbid, then we are able to use the guns to protect our families, our businesses, our churches, our nonprofits in this community. So we understand and we see that. With what happened in Parkland, safety for schools is at the forefront of our minds. But we also know, and I understand that taking away gun rights is not the solution. I've talked to both the sheriff in Miami County and Darke County, and what we've seen from that is to keep our children safe. What we do is we don't mandate things on a state level. We give the power to the local sheriff and the local school district, because in the same way that every child is different, every school is different. So we need to be able to work with the local sheriff, the local school, to keep our children safe. But as your state representative, what I will do is I will protect the Second Amendment rights. I've been endorsed by Ohioans for concealed carry and the Buckeye Firearm Association, and I'm proud of that, and I look forward to supporting that and fighting for it.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien.
Thanks, Abby. Growing up in West Milton, you learn to appreciate guns. When I was in school, kids would be let off school at the start of deer hunting season. My mom would never let me go. I was never allowed to miss school, sometimes even when I was sick. But I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm a lifetime member of the NRA. I would be hard-pressed to ever add anything at the state level to keep guns out of law-abiding people's hands. All you have to do is look at Chicago. My daughter is 20 7 years old. She just had a birthday recently, and she lives in the north side of Chicago, and the south side of Chicago have murders and murders and murders. And they have the strongest gun control laws in the country. I would be hard-pressed to ever do anything at the state level on the Second Amendment. But as far as school safety goes, I'm so proud of what we've done at Miami County. As this doesn't happen as a commissioner, and I'll get to talk that, I assume, at some point, but our sheriff and the Newton School District got together. Newton wanted to have staff and or teachers armed in the school district. So they went to the sheriff and said, how can we do this? And the sheriff and Newton School District came up with a plan on how to do it. Every person who would be armed in that school district had to go through training through the sheriff's office, had to get qualified with a firearm. They have plans that only the school district and law enforcement know how to tell who those people are who would have a weapon, so that they wouldn't be mistaken for someone who is an active shooter. And I'm proud of our sheriff for doing that. I'm proud of the Newton schools for making that decision. Schools have to have that decision made. They have to make that decision for themselves and work with the law enforcement agency that represents that school district. And I don't think anything coming down from the feds or the state would be better than that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jones?
I kind of take a different tact. I don't think this is about the Second Amendment at all. I'm a former NRA member. I also own guns as well. And I believe people should have them to protect their homes. If they need them to protect their homes, they should have that ability. But I am for universal background checks. About 86%, at least the data that I've seen, 86% of the people, the population, believes in a universal background check. I don't think that's a bad idea. When I went into the woods to hunt, I didn't have a 30-round clip. I didn't have a silencer on the end of my gun. And the rate of fire was maybe 1 a minute because I breech loaded every round. I was hunting a deer. If you have to go into the woods with a 30-round clip and be able to fire, rapid rounds, there's something wrong with you. You need some more practice. You're actually not only a danger to yourself, but all the other hunters that are around you. I believe bump stock should be banned. I don't think any device that can be added to a rifle or a pistol to increase its original design, form or function, should be allowed. I mean, you do things like that to increase the rate of your fire, and it's just not safe to do that. I also think armor-piercing bullets should be taken off the market. I don't think there's any place for it. Why do you have to shoot at a deer with an armor-piercing bullet? Doesn't make sense. As far as the safety goes in schools, I think the school districts have a lot to say in that. I think parents have a lot to say in that, and they have a right to say something about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Guyette?
The notion that owning a gun is a God-given right is kind of absurd. Up until the 1990s, the Second Amendment was understood to be an anachronism. It was passed at a time when the U.S. didn't have police forces. We didn't have a standing army. So people were expected to be armed in case they needed to track down a criminal or repel an invasion. That was the purpose of the Second Amendment. And we so often hear from the Republican Party that we need to go back to the original interpretation of the Constitution instead of all these innovative novelties that have come in later years. It wasn't really until the NRA started pushing this whole notion of an individual right to own arms in the 90s that people started to re-examine that whole Second Amendment. I believe the Second Amendment does not protect a person's, I believe it's outdated. It doesn't protect the right to own arms. I don't have a problem with law-abiding citizens who are not violent criminals owning guns for personal protection, for home protection, for sport, or just because they like them. I don't want somebody who's on the terror no-fly list to be able to buy black powder and buy arms. I mean, by the logic of the gun enthusiasts, if arming everybody makes all of us safer, why not arm every nation with an atomic weapon? Wouldn't that make the world safer? I mean, that's the same kind of logic that they're using. And when people claim that Chicago is so dangerous and that gun deaths are so high because they have strict gun laws, they're overlooking the fact that just a few miles away you have the state of Indiana, which has some of the most lax gun laws in the nation. I favor closing the background check loopholes. You can now buy guns on the internet or at a gun show without having a background check. I want to see high-capacity magazines reduced to 10, and I want to eliminate assault weapons.
Thank you. Dr. Enoch?
I support the Second Amendment. I also agree with Ted and Matthew over here. I agree with everything they said. I believe that for the sake of public safety, that there has to be responsible gun legislation passed. There needs to be an age limit on the attainment of firearms. We set limits on things like drinking and driving and even going to the movies, but people don't want to see legislation that limits who can actually own a firearm. And to Ms. Powell's comments, she says that we should be able to do that in case the government gets too big. Well, the thing is, if the government comes, they're coming with tanks and tear gas and grenades, and no amount of firearms that we have in our homes is going to protect us from a rogue government. We need to take military-grade weapons out of the hands of civilians. I don't advocate for arming teachers because, as my daughter said, and she just stepped out of the room, I may not be my teacher's favorite.
Right.
I think we need to consider background checks and to ensure that we don't try and turn our school teachers into law enforcement officers. That's not their role. It's not their job. And I definitely don't want to see something like that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sample?
Thank you. For me, I have a different interpretation as to why the Second Amendment exists. And just like Matthew has said over here, it has a different interpretation for me as to what it was put in place for. When we talk about the rounding up of slaves and how slavery, when slaves became free, militia became nervous because of that. These are the things that no one ever wants to talk about as to where it came from. Yes, everyone has the right to own a gun, absolutely. And I just struggle when they say it's a God-given right, because I don't look at God as God giving us the authority to own guns. That's not what my God says to me. But no one should own an assault weapon unless you are military, period. These are weapons of war. You don't need it to protect your home. You don't need it for hunting. You don't need it for anything but to kill. These are weapons that are used to kill. And so when we talk about what needs to happen and making sure that we respect the rights of a gun owner, absolutely. My dad is a military vet. I have a son-in-law who's a retired vet, and these are conversations that we've had extensively. You have to ban an assault weapon. You have to get rid of bump stocks. You have to get rid of trigger cranks, which no one ever really talks about. This trigger crank is what was used in Vegas. And any time that you can shoot anywhere from 400 to 800 rounds in less than a minute, that is to kill. You're not going hunting. That's not to protect your home. And so I think when people start talking about certain weapons that fall into this category, they get worried that you mean you're going to take everyone's weapons. That's not what the meaning of it is. We're saying that we need to make sure that this weapon of war, this weapon is used to kill massive amounts of people in a short period of time, has no place in our society. It has no place in our community, and we do not need to wait until it hits another school for us to say we need to do something about it.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley?
Thank you. I think this is probably one of the most politicized issues that we're facing today as a country. And people look at what's happening in the media, and they say that if you're on the left, that you want to take everyone's guns away, and if you're on the right, You value guns over other people's lives, and I simply don't think that either of those things are true when you get down to the core of who we are as Americans. I don't think anyone values a gun over somebody else's life. I don't believe that, whether Republican or Democrat. I do believe that there is common sense middle ground that we can talk about, that the vast majority of Americans do talk about. I do believe that the Second Amendment, right now, if you look at the interpretation as it's gone through many court cases, does guarantee the individual's right to own a weapon. That's not really something that we can debate right now. That's just what has been decided by a court of law. What we have also decided, though, is that there are certain limitations to the lethality of what a weapon that an American can own and possess. It's not like my next door neighbor is going to own a bazooka and I'm going to enjoy being neighbors with him. I think that when we talk about assault rifles and things like that, again, we're missing kind of the point and the intent of what that conversation is, and that conversation is more, again, a question of lethality. I shot my first AR-15 in my military leadership class at UD, and the only difference between that and a hunting rifle that my buddy would take with his dad is the platform and the ability to add attachments to it. And I think a lot of times, we have politicians who talk about guns and they don't really know what they're talking about, and that's a problem that we have to fix. We have to be educated about these things. We have to talk to our constituents about these things, and frankly, I do believe that there is middle ground. I think you look at a state like Indiana, that where I grew up, that is fairly conservative, who has passed a red flag law that gives more control to local government and more control to local communities to police themselves. And I think you can look at things like that and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson?
Well, I've been a concealed carry card holder since 2009. I actually do own an AR-15. Just so everyone understands, AR does not stand for assault rifle. This could be an assault weapon. Utilizing fertilizer from my cows along with personal household chemicals could wipe out just as many people as what is considered an assault rifle, which isn't really a technical term. And I've actually been working to advance hunting, fishing, trapping initiatives, and have specifically organized in minority communities and areas with high crime rates. You'll see me featured at local levels, making sure that women and minorities in particular have access to be able to have their concealed carry license. I want to make sure that, given the fact of our response times in police institutions, that folks actually do have the ability to protect themselves if the need should arise. I do believe the Second Amendment is 100% in place to protect against government tyranny. If we want to talk about historical factors, there have been other regimes that have taken our second or other countries' Second Amendment rights away, and I think Germany would be a good example of that. And you don't have to agree, sir, but this is my position on the matter. I will be an ardent defender of the Second Amendment. I will continue to advance those initiatives with women and minorities in particular, and I will continue to spread the truths of what the Second Amendment is in place for. There's not a magical word that I can put on paper to change the heart and the intention of someone who wishes to inflict harm, and that's just the facts as they stand. We have taught children that killing children, viable children in the womb, is somehow women's health care, and then we want to wonder why children have such a devaluation of life for human beings. We need to speak the truth to issues and bring things to light, and I am an ardent defender of the Second Amendment.
Thank you. The topic of the third question will be about drug policy, and Mr. Guyette, we'll start with you. What is your position on public drug policy, both in terms of medical and recreational marijuana, and the opioid crisis which we are currently experiencing?
Thanks for the question. I don't have personal experience with drug addiction, but I will say that 15 years ago, I gave up alcohol because I had a lot of problems in my life, and I realized that there was one thing that affected every single area where I had problems, and it was alcohol. And I learned that addiction is a spiritual disease. It's a disease that no amount of spending or medical care will fix until the person themselves is ready to seek help and realizes that the problem is them and their addiction rather than everybody around them. I always thought my problem was everybody around me and that I drank because I had all these problems. And it took me a while to realize that the problem was me and the alcohol. I believe that we need to, as a society, do a better job of making sure resources are available for people who realize they have a problem, want to find a better way, and we need to have pathways for them to do that, and we need to support that 100%. But at the same time, I know that if someone is not ready to change their addiction and doesn't believe that the drugs or the alcohol are the problem, no amount of spending or care or thought on the part of people around them is going to make any difference whatsoever. Unfortunately, drug addiction brings a lot of crime, a lot of domestic violence into our communities, and unfortunately it's a law enforcement and a family issue as well. So it's a very difficult issue. That's why nobody has solved it so far. But I guess that's the two-prong approach. I would like to see us, there have to be consequences. A lot of times people don't realize they have a problem with alcohol until they get a DUI. So there have to be consequences, but at the same time we need to be reaching out a hand and saying, if you want a better way, if you want to improve your life, this is the way to do it, because that's the way I did it when I had a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Enoch?
Can you ask that question one more time? I want to make sure I answer correctly.
What is your position on the public drug policy, both in terms of medical and recreational marijuana use and the opioid crisis which we are currently experiencing?
Thank you. I think that as a former chemical dependency counselor, that one of the things that's being overlooked the most is funding for treatment. I think that treatment has to be a priority anytime someone has a drug addiction. The treatment up to now in this country has been to put people who have drug addictions and mental illness and that sort of thing behind bars. Incarceration is not the place for a person who has a drug addiction. If we get a handle on treatment and ensure that we're doing things to help people to come off of drugs, we wouldn't have the addiction problem that we have currently. As well, the opioid problem did not start in the streets. The opioid problem started in medical facilities with doctors and pharmacies pushing painkillers. So since it didn't start in the street, I don't think we need to handle it as though it's a street problem. I think we need to ensure that people who have drug addiction, that we identify the origins of those drug addictions so that other people don't continue to have access to those kinds of drugs. Opioids are very addictive drugs. So that's the start. And in terms of the criminalization of marijuana, I think at the very least it needs to be decriminalized. Like the individual who used to hold the seat in this district, John Boehner, just recently changed his position on marijuana. I think that marijuana offenses, that individuals with 3 strikes you're out and some of the other federal legislation turned minor drug offenders into long-term prison sentences. And so that in order to bring an end to that particular problem, we definitely need to decriminalize marijuana and get rid of the legislation that makes it a serious offense. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Thank you. I kind of agree with everything that Vanessa was saying. The opioid problem in our country is just horrendous. It's epidemic levels. It's like a 737 falling out of the sky and killing everybody every day. We need to like Vanessa said, create treatment centers. Roughly only 1 in 10 gets actual treatment, and they have to stay in treatment for a length of time that allows them to get better. It's a complex problem because it's an economic problem. It affects people's mental state. It's a physiological problem. And there's also a law enforcement component to that. With regard to the marijuana situation, I'm for, or I'm in favor of, medical marijuana. But I have to tell you honestly that I'm a little bit hesitant on the recreational use because we haven't established any boundaries. If you become, I guess, drunk, I guess, for the lack of a better word, there is a barrier there. There is a line to cross. Police can enforce impairment and take you to jail. With marijuana, you don't have that yet. And I think we need to establish some controls. I also think low-level offenders, you know, if you're sent to prison, I think I saw a story on television just this morning where a guy was let out of prison. He served 7 years for smoking 2 joints. I mean, that's not even, that doesn't even make any sense. So we have to address those kind of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Sample?
Yes, thank you. I support medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, and I think once they are passed on a state level, recreational, that we need to decriminalize marijuana, and those who are incarcerated due to a marijuana charge should automatically be released from jail, and those cases be expunged from their record. As it relates to the opiate crisis, you know, I bring a different perspective than many people that are running for office, because I am a parent of a child with an addiction. So we've lived it, and we've worked through it, and we've worked with several agencies, and, you know, I sit on task force at home with other mothers and other family members, and we see what is missing in this process. Addiction is a disease. You know, and when people call them they're addicts, they're junkies, it is the most offensive, because no one wakes up in the morning and says that they want to be a heroin addict or they just want to be an addict. That's one of the things that really disturbs me when I hear people get in forums and say that. No one wants to be that. But we have to say to ourselves, how do we address and combat the disease? Well, first you have to treat the whole person. You know, we focus so much on we have to tackle the opiate crisis, we forget about the person. You have to treat the whole person holistically. First, you have to address the mental health of the person, because most of them have a mental health issue. The addiction started more than likely from a doctor's office. Maybe they had a sports injury, or they went and had teeth pulled out, and it only takes 14 days to become an addict. And so we have to make sure that we have those barriers in place to make sure that these doctors are being held accountable when they're overprescribing these kind of medications to individuals. And this epidemic is ageless and it's colorless, and it's affecting everyone across the state. And so we first have to make sure that we treat the whole person in order for there to actually be some real comprehensive change to it, and making sure that facilities are there to make sure that we can treat our children.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Powell?
Yeah, so to begin with, everyone in this room has probably been infected in one way or another by this opioid crisis. It's called crisis for a reason, and it's a very difficult situation. I do not believe another government-run program is the solution to this crisis. I think we see a three-step, part of a solution. It's a crisis for a reason, and there's not an easy solution. But I think to step in the right direction, we have 3 things. One, we need to rehaul the healthcare system. John Kasich has done nothing good with the Medicaid expansion in our state. So we need to freeze that, and we need to get healthcare back to the way it should be, which is the free market. Secondly, we see that drugs are flowing in illegally from Mexico. Donald Trump is building the wall, and that's more of a federal issue. But on a state level, what we can do is we can say no to sanctuary cities. And on the third level is we see a breakdown in our society of families. And you ask, okay, how does a state representative strengthen families? Well, what we do is we cut regulations and we lower taxes, because when we see those things, we're going to see communities thrive. That's a step in the right direction with this opioid crisis in our community. When it comes to the marijuana issue, I have traveled with my mom both to Colorado and California, and I've seen the negative effects of legalizing marijuana. So I would be against the legalization of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Wintereg?
Yeah, I always say the best drug policy is economic stability. Getting people to work, getting them off their feet, giving them a little bit of hope in their lives, that's something that can steer them away. And I mean, if you look at every facet of this, you can point to where the government has intervened and how this has exploded. The Medicaid expansion our governor took on coincided with the explosion of this heroin crisis. our government has done more to perpetuate this and harm the people here than anybody realizes, I think. And I think part of the problem is we've had churches who have foregone their responsibility to take care of their communities. And we have church leaders who need to step up and acknowledge that there is a problem, provide private means to fix these issues, to guide the people who are addicted. You know, I work at a grain elevator. We had a guy come in one day, I'll call him Bill, came in off the street, was asking for help, and kind of listening to his story. It's kind of crazy to think about how our government helped put him in this spot. He was arrested for a drug charge, and while in jail, he wasn't paying child support. So because he wasn't paying child support, he lost his license. When he got out of jail, he didn't have his license to go look for a job, and when he could find someone there, he had a record, so they wouldn't hire him. So what he was pointed to was basically cash under the table jobs. And when you have a guy who's addicted with cash in his pocket, he goes back to what he was doing before. And we tried to help this guy out. Ultimately, his daughter found him with a needle and in his arm, and he passed, obviously. And that was it's kind of hard for us. It was my first experience, I think, with that. But you look at all these government barriers that help put him in this spot, we can remove those. The one thing we need to do, though, is focus on making sure people don't start, and that starts with our churches and communities.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien?
Thanks. First of all, medical marijuana is legal in Ohio. Our state representative, Steve Huffman, who's also a physician, was the sponsor of that bill. One of the reasons the legislature passed it and the governor signed it was to keep a much more liberal ballot initiative off the ballot in Ohio that would have legalized recreational marijuana. I'm against recreational marijuana being legalized in Ohio. I think it brings too many pitfalls. As far as the opioid crisis goes, in Miami County, we've seen less and less opiate and pain-killing type opiate drugs being a problem in Miami County. However, we are seeing meth and crack increase. How we have battled it in Miami County, I'm very happy to say we have something called the Heroin Coalition, which they now call themselves the Drug Coalition. It's a faith group, law enforcement, and recovering mental health services in Miami County that all work together to try to eradicate this problem. I'm very happy that they've done it and they've seen a lot of success. It could be a model for the rest of the state. As far as how we can keep people off of drugs, it has to be an education thing. We all remember a couple things. Just say no. And we remember a frying pan that says, if this is your brain, this is your brain on drugs. We can all remember those images in our head. Those things work. We need to educate our young folks what drugs will do to them. And then we need to make sure law enforcement is funded enough that they can keep drugs out of our communities. Lastly, the county commissioners work with Tri-County Mental Health, and we help fund a program to help mental health pay for prisoners who are addicted when they come to the jail to get services for treatment and to get help. So we're proud that we've done that. And Tri-County Mental Health Director Mark McDaniel says they're seeing some success in that program. So not only do I have theories on how this could work, we've actually worked with the professionals locally to help get that done.
Thank you. Mr. Lovett?
Thank you. I'm wary of any marijuana legalization. I sit on a Tri-County Board of Recovery and Mental Health, and the professionals there tell me that the statistics coming out of Colorado and Washington are not good. The average age of first use is going down. Crime rates are going up. It's the popular, sexy thing now, and to point to John Boehner and say maybe we ought to leap in this direction. I don't think so, because if we make a mistake here, we won't be able to correct it. It'll be years down the road. Let's take our time. Let's look at what happens in other states, and let's learn from them. Let's do more with less on combating the opioid issue. We need to focus on it like a laser beam. We're losing 14 youngsters a day in this state, our children and grandchildren, to these drug overdoses. We cannot ignore it. We need to focus on it harder. But let's not necessarily throw more money at the problem. Let's make smarter use of the dollars we already have. One Wellness Place is an initiative by the Tri-County Board of Recovery and Mental Health. I've been on its board for 15 years. We're going to put under one roof all the services they need to get well. They aren't going to have to travel to a different place for drug counseling, therapy, community health. or other issues that they need. It's all going to be in one place to make it more likely they will succeed. The other thing is, by providing all the services in one place, we're going to reduce the overhead of the providers. We're projecting it's going to save over $200,000 a year in operating costs, and we've raised over $1 million in the private sector towards this initiative. If we can do that here, that's a model that maybe we can use elsewhere and really get a good clawback on this problem. And finally, the fentanyl, the heroin, the other opioids, they're plentiful, they're cheap, and they're coming across the border from Mexico. We need to get the feds to do a better job of getting a handle on that.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson?
You know, the tools are there really to be able to address this. And I'm blessed in the sense that I work with a lot of different faith providers across the state who are really aggressively attacking this, and folks are living in recovery for quite some time. I think there's a huge faith-based component that goes into this. We have seen success rates with those who have been able to live successfully in recovery with that component. I also believe that there's a tremendous amount of job skills and training that needs to start as early as the educational stage, so that we can make sure that people have hope and that they do have productive work habits when it's time to go into the workforce. I know it's not a popular thing to say in government, but let our community and our faith-based initiatives that are actually working to keep people in recovery have the necessary funds that they need to have access to. I can't tell you how many times I hear traveling this state, whether it's the local sheriff's department, or it doesn't matter if it's the Christian community or the Muslim community or whomever it is, they spend a significant amount of time fundraising for these initiatives. We need to be able to give the states and the community-based local control to fund these initiatives and to help people live successfully in recovery. As for the second piece on legalization, or as you are aware, medical marijuana is legal. I live with a very rare bone disease myself. The left side of my face has been reconstructed about 22 times. I also owned a healthcare staffing agency where we watch people go through various stages of life, clear through to a hospice scenario. I can assure you that I believe that it's up to the patient as well as the patient's family with regard to how they medicate to be able to manage and handle pain. I don't believe that opioid or a morphine drip is the only way to be able to take care of someone in situations of pain.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley?
Thank you. You know, I think, you know, medical marijuana has a place in pain treatment, and I think that's something that we have passed as a state, and I support that. I think if we look at recreational marijuana, I do think that that is something that should be decided by the people. And if you're going to pass something like that, legalization like that, I think it should be a ballot initiative that people decide, and it should be a fair ballot initiative, not one like we've seen in the past that was fairly skewed, shall we say, to say the least. When it comes to the opioid health crisis, you know, I think sometimes we forget who this is affecting, and it's affecting everybody. You know, when I was working for Sherrod Brown, I met this young man who was a former student at Wright State, and he broke his leg in a skiing accident, never had any drug abuse before in his life. His doctor prescribed opioids to him, and you know, he used it for the pain, and all of a sudden he kept on it, and once he couldn't get a prescription anymore, what happens after that is you move on to heroin. And this isn't just something where it's just affecting the poor community or one section of our community. This is affecting everybody, and it's not something you can just treat by saying we need to improve our access to health care and improve our treatment process. We have to look at the source of how people are getting addicted in the first place too. And I think you know, I applaud Commissioner O'Brien and his community's approach to this, and I think that's something that we can take a look at as a state and say that, you know, we do have communities who are tackling this in a more effective way than others. What are they doing? What can we be doing as a state to more collectively fight this health crisis? And again, remembering that as we fight this health crisis, remembering this is a human crisis, and that we are every single day, as the man next to me has stated, 14 Ohioans are dying every single day, and to say that we're doing good enough as a state is just wrong. We have to do better, and I think this is something, again, where we can create bipartisan support to move the needle in a positive way to help save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. The fourth topic that we will look at tonight is healthcare. What is your position on healthcare? And this topic can include private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Health Care Act. Mr. Winter, you'll start. Sorry.
Thanks. I think healthcare is best handled in the private sector. Anywhere the government has gotten involved with anything, whether it's healthcare, education, you see costs go up. With this Medicaid expansion, there's been a focus on coverage and not on quality of care, and we've seen quality go down, and issues arise like the opioid crisis. It's really best left to the free market. Let the people choose. You know, like I said, I'm going back to living in France. I've lived in a place where there's socialized medicine, and the healthcare, while there was access to it, the quality was not great. Working over there, I had to go get a chest x-ray, and they made me go to a mandated city that was 40 minutes away to see another mandated doctor, and it took 3 weeks to do that, to set it all up and to get there. Here, I had an injury with my ankle after I came home from France, and within 3 hours I was able to get it looked at and diagnosed. The point is, we had more of a free market back then when it was 03 or whatnot than we do now. We're heading in the direction of France, and I've seen how the quality of care is there, and I can't wait to listen to the Democrats lecture me on how wrong I am with their higher understanding of life. But I lived it, and this is how it was. I cannot underline more how we need to leave it to the free market, how we need to get the government out of it entirely, how we need to let the doctors be doctors, we need to let the patients make decisions, and we have guys there doing good things. Jim Butler, Representative Jim Butler, he's got a healthcare price transparency bill, law now, that we are supposed to be able to go and look and shop around prices of healthcare. Unfortunately, our government has put our governor has put blockades in, and I believe he's suing, so we can't do that. Because right now we've got the Republicans in our state house who are owned by the medical lobby. So we need to get new blood in there, we need to get these lobbyists out, and we need to allow the free market to work.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien?
Thank you. I was against Obamacare when it passed. I don't think the federal government has any right to mandate things on us for our health care. I think the private sector should take care of that, and people and their employers should have a say in that, in what they offer to their employees. There's a free marketplace out there. If employers offer better benefit packages to their employees, they'll take that into consideration when they're looking for positions. Right now, we have a shortage of workers in Ohio. The actual employee who is out there has so much leverage right now to move jobs and to get better paying jobs and better benefits. So I think if you let the free market take care of it, it'll work. As far something that wasn't talked about so far is Medicaid expansion in Ohio. I was against it when it happened in Ohio, and I'm against it now. And when I'm a legislator, I'll vote to stop Medicaid expansion. JD said something about not being able to check prices. As a county commissioner, when I first started with the county had what was considered great health care benefits. And as the market has changed, the more and more the government got in control, we've had to move to high deductible plans with health savings accounts. Our employees can't stand it. Means they have to meet a deductible that could be as high as $8,000 before health insurance kicks in. The county kicked in some money depending on if you're a single or a family member. So we're starting to look at ways to be innovative in that. And one of the ways is we're telling our employees they need to shop around for procedures. And there's something out there that we're starting called the Healthcare Blue Book. It's just like looking at what your car is worth. And you can look at what a procedure costs for Premier, you can look at what it costs for Kettering, you can look at what it costs for a Cincinnati hospital. And the unique thing is, Premier is the highest by far, Kettering's better, but when you look at the Cincinnati hospitals, where there's 5 hospitals competing with each other, the prices down there are about a third of what they are for Premier. So we're making sure our employees know that information, because the difference between driving to Troy and Cincinnati is only 1 hour, and you can save substantial money.
Thank you. Mr. Lovett?
Thanks. Healthcare is a very frustrating thing for a state legislator, because the vast bulk of the health insurance and health-related decisions made in this country occur at the federal level. For example, Medicaid is a program where the feds set all the rules, and they only provide 65% of the cost. The states have to kick in the other 35%, yet the states have to follow federal rules, and if you want to do anything any differently, you've got to get a waiver from Washington to do it your way. That's awfully frustrating. But there are things we can do at the state level. And what I would focus on is let's do more to turn people into consumers. It is crazy where you go into the healthcare marketplace and you don't know what things cost. A few years ago, we had a family member who needed stents and did not have health insurance. We learned the hard way that that cost $250,000 to have 3 stents done in the Dayton, Ohio market, and we tried to shop around and be intelligent. Nobody could tell us what it would cost. It was an incredibly frustrating situation. What we can do at the state level is let's do some intervention to force a disclosure of what costs really are so people can be intelligent consumers. The ultimate solution to the health care problem, in which we have escalating costs and we seem to be getting less bang for the buck, is we need to empower people to be consumers so you can do your own shopping. I wasn't a fan of Obamacare. I'm not a fan of any unitary system. We need to stick with the private sector, but we need to let the private sector work like other things in the marketplace do. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Powell?
So Obama came in and created Obamacare and tried to solve all of our healthcare issues. And we see where that's led all of us. Many of us have horrible healthcare. I own a business throughout the state. Hiring is difficult because not only do I have regulations and taxes, I also have to count in everyone's healthcare cost. And that's crazy expensive. While I want to pay one of my employees X amount, I can't because the healthcare cost is so crazy high. John Kasich did nothing good when we have Medicaid. We need to freeze Medicaid expansion, and just like they mentioned, let's get healthcare back to the free market and back to what it was supposed to be. You're going to see from that, and this wasn't spoken about, but let's talk about it. You're going to see better jobs. You're going to see more jobs. You're going to see higher paying jobs. This is just all from a business owner saying, I want to hire more people. And this year, I wasn't able to hire an additional person because we had too high of taxes, too much regulation, the healthcare cost. And when you see that, you're going to see a thriving community. You're going to see thriving families, churches, nonprofits. It all goes together. So I'm big on, let's freeze Medicaid expansion. Let's do our very best as a state legislator to get the healthcare system back to the free market.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson?
Well, let me tell you something. I know the Obamacare market, and I know what happened more than most folks. As I mentioned, I live with a very rare pre-existing condition. I also have a child who lives with a rare pre-existing condition as well. I knew what the Ohio market looked like with free enterprise and free market design prior to the ACA being implemented, and I knew what it looked like afterwards. In fact, I was able to articulate what a disaster the government's involvement was to the point of being invited to Washington by both the president and the vice president, and then I was featured in a book called The New American Revolution about the average American who fought back against intrusive government policy. What I will tell you is this: the government has consistently failed the people when it comes to getting overly involved, whether it's regulatory and compliance issues or whether it has to do with health care. The reason that the Medicaid systems are buckling at the seams, and I know this because my family and I had to go to a welfare office and we were enrolled into Medicaid courtesy of the parameters of the Affordable Care Act. The reason the Medicaid systems are buckling is there's no personal responsibility with Medicaid. There's no prescription costs. There's no monthly copay. There is absolutely no financial responsibility. Now, you tell me how far we have fallen as a country when the years my business was doing the best, I was driven into government-managed programs that didn't manage my disease, nor did it manage my child's situation. Yet the year I had a break-even year, I was enrolled through a Medicaid system and everything was covered. Our systems are broken and our entitlement systems are a wreck because the indicator and the measures are based on the least amount of productivity and the least amount of reportable income. I confirmed this with John Kasich's administration as I had met with the head of Medicaid and I had met with the head of Job and Family Services, and they unequivocally agreed with me that this is why the systems are buckling at the seams. Get the government out of our health care, give us free market design, free enterprise, and allow us to shop for our insurance in the way that we could long before the Affordable Care Act was implemented. The Republicans and Democrats have let all of us down. That's a bipartisan letdown.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley?
Thank you. I think this is an issue that that many in the room and I will disagree on, and I will always tell you honestly where I am and what I feel and what I believe, and I do think that access to quality, affordable health care is something that we should provide to Americans. You know, I have a hard time when I look at, when we talk about Medicaid expansion, and I obviously understand that we need to find a way to more effectively fund that, because that is a concern. But, you know, over 700,000 Ohioans have gotten access to health care through that program. And we just talked about the opioid crisis, and 150,000 of those Ohioans have gotten access to mental health and substance abuse treatment. And if we're going to remove that, we have to understand what those human ramifications are. And that's something I think that we, as Republicans and Democrats, can figure out a way to move forward positively. You know, I do know that there is a lot of problems with the Affordable Care Act. I don't think any honest Democrat will tell you that the Affordable Care Act is perfect, because it's not. And I think there's ways that as a state legislator, we can improve the Affordable Care Act, because it is the law of the land right now, and we need to do everything we can to make it more effective for you. And as a state of you know, as a state, I think we can do that. You know, I do know that there's that the healthcare industry is a booming industry. It's one with a ton of lobbyists. It's one with a ton of money in it, and special interest dollars in it too. And you know, there's when we were going through the Affordable Care Act debate, and I was going to town halls, I talked to folks, and I met this one woman who had cancer diagnosis, and she had her health care through a private company. And when she was going to go get treatment, her company looked at her health care records and realized that she did not disclose that she had acne as a high school kid, and they chose to say that was a pre-existing condition and that they would no longer fund her cancer treatment. You know, there are things like that happened in the old system too that were just wrong, that were robberies. And I think, you know, we can do things to make sure that that people aren't making millions of dollars off the backs of people's lives and their health. And I think that's what we can work on.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Sample?
I think health care for all is just a given. I think everyone should have access to health care. They should have access to low-cost, basic medical, mental health, and dental prescription care. I think that's just, you know, when we think about us as a country, and we're said that we are the richest and wealthiest nation in the world, but yet we won't give health care to all. So I think we need to start there to have a system that across the board gives health care to all. I support the Medicaid expansion, and I think Governor Kasich was pretty bold in taking that step. There's 3.1 million Ohioans that are dependent on that system. So I really commend him on taking that stance. And the Affordable Care Act, yeah, it has some positive and negatives to it, and I think that there's some room for improvement as it relates to that program. I think the intent was well, but there's some areas that definitely need tweaks. So I think we have to get to a place in our state and in our country where everyone has access to health care.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Enoch?
As an economist, I understand that sometimes market forces don't work. In fact, long before the public sector ever got involved, the private sector created managed care. It was the worst thing ever for insurance, because ultimately the private sector decided not to cover the cost of treatment for consumers who were paying for their insurance. It was the high deductibles and those high premiums that caused individuals to cry out for a public option. As someone who has also worked in the insurance industry, I can tell you that the insurance industry is a profit-driven industry, not people-driven. Right. We need a public option, just as we have publicly funded police, firemen, and libraries. When market forces don't work, we need to take care of the people. That's why governments exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Guyette?
Yeah, as a country, we pay some of the highest price per capita for medical care in this country, and we have some of the worst outcomes of developed countries. What a lot of people forget about is that Obamacare, as it's called, the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act, was the Republican plan. It was the plan that was implemented in Massachusetts by Mitt Romney. It was very successful there. And if Republicans would stop attacking it and sabotaging it, it would be a lot more successful across the country. I'm always amazed by people who say government can't do anything right, government is the problem, but they can't wait to run for office and get into government. I've never quite understood how that worked. I also, like Vanessa, believe we need the public option. This was something that was in the original Obamacare, because Obamacare never was meant to be government insurance. It basically is a mandate for insurance companies to cover certain things that they refused to cover before, like pre-existing conditions, to do away with their lifetime limits and their annual limits. And the public option was going to be something that would give the private insurance companies a run for their money. You know, if people are fond of saying on the right that government can't do anything right, the private sector always does it better. Okay, allow a public option. Allow the federal government to provide government health care if people choose it, and let's see which one gives better outcomes and is less expensive. I think, you know, the free market does a lot of things well, but one thing it doesn't do well is provide for people's health coverage, because they have an incentive to kick all the people off that are costing a lot of money. And that's not the situation we want. That's exactly when you need your insurance to be there for you, is when you get some catastrophic illness. And to people who say that there's no requirement for insurance, why do we have to have car insurance, but we don't have to have health insurance? If you can just show up to an emergency room and everybody else has to pay for it. What about personal responsibility?
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
We talked a little bit about free market forces. I really don't think there are any free market forces in our healthcare system. I used to negotiate healthcare systems or healthcare plans for our company, and I can tell you in this one particular instance that I'm recalling, we had 2 claims, and our broker came in and he said, your premiums are going to go up 30%, without any discussion at all. He just looked at us and said it's going to go up 30%. There is no free market forces in our healthcare system. We have one of the best healthcare systems there is on this planet, I think. But we have the most costly plans imaginable. I looked at Canada. Now, one gentleman cited France as not having a good experience. I know the healthcare system in Canada, which I'm very intimate with because I know people that use it. It works just as well as ours. The government takes a cut off the top from the taxes and it funds the whole system. They don't have to worry about anything else. They don't have to worry about pre-existing conditions. They just get the treatment they did. And it's comparable to what we have. I think we can do the same thing here. I think of my mother when she went into the hospital. She was in there one day, and she incurred a $6,000 medical bill for one day. She got put into a room because it was the hospital's decision. Instead of leaving her in the hall, they put her in a room that had telemetry in it, so she got billed for that. That's not fair. That's just the way they bill people to finance their own system. So I would be an advocate for a single-payer system. Thank you.
Thank you. The fifth question will deal with infrastructure. And Mr. Jones, you will start. We hear and read stories about how our public infrastructure is deteriorating and is in need of repairs. These repairs include bridges, roads, highways, airports, and the electrical grid. What is your position on this subject, and what would you like to see happen, and how would you pay for it?
I pay for it the same way Trump is going to pay for it. That's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Actually, we do need stronger infrastructure, and when I think of that, I also think about people that are on the poverty level. There's no quicker way out of the poverty level to put people back to work. I would advocate that they would be paid an equitable salary to help them get them out of poverty. Obviously, it's going to be coming. The funding is going to have to be come out of the funding that, the taxes that we pay in. Right now, we have a lot of the tax money, or the last tax plan went to the top wealthiest portion of our society. I think some of that should be relooked at. I think some of that needs to be rediscussed and maybe even reallocated so we can put that money in the resources like building bridges, our roads, and parks and systems. I would be much in favor of a way of rebuilding the U.S. much like FDR did in the 40s. He put people back to work, and we all benefit from it. So we do need to discuss how we were going to do it. We do need to discuss how we're going to fund it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Guyette?
You know, infrastructure is something that's really sorely needed in this country. We've neglected our roads, our bridges, our railroads, our ports for years and years and years, while we've always funded our military at the highest levels. We're spending $700 billion a year to pay for a military that protects corporations that choose to go overseas. You know, in the old days, you used to invest in the U.S. because you knew your investment was going to be safe. If you built a factory here, there wasn't going to be a revolution that would take over and nationalize it. If you built overseas, you might make more profits, but you took a greater risk, and you'd have to shoulder that risk. Well, with the U.S. military guarding the entire world and being the policeman in the entire world, we've given corporations an incentive to move overseas to countries where wages are lower, raw materials are cheaper, and environmental regulations in most cases are non-existent. So we're actually funding the very outsourcing that's giving the gut punch to the middle class in this country. I would like to see us take some of that funding that we're spending on overseas military to maintain a global economic empire that we don't even tax and spend some of that money here in the U.S. on infrastructure. That's a way of investing. Infrastructure and education that we talked about earlier, the two areas that are most important for ensuring a strong future for the United States. We have to put back, we have to remember what people did, generations that came before us, and the sacrifices they made so we could live in the society we have today. Are we leaving our society as good as we found it? I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Brand new schools, flush budgets, you know, a great country. I want to see future generations have the same opportunities that I had growing up. And I think we need to start investing here instead of overseas.
Thank you. Dr. Enoch?
First and foremost, I do believe we need to invest in our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is aging, and it is not equipped to deal with the climate change that we're dealing with. The other issue is that our treatment facilities, our sewage and water treatment facilities, our reservoirs, our flood protection, all of those things, our dams, levees, flood walls, pumps, and reservoirs all need to be redesigned to deal with this climate change. We can already see the effects across the state of Ohio with flooding. In this county, in fact, in Butler County and other counties across the district, Clark County is also suffering from flooding as a result of our infrastructure not being developed properly. The way that I would fund a new infrastructure development would be to use some of that $70 billion that we're looking at building a wall along the border. I would install technology, cameras and various technologies instead of building a wall. And I would take that $70 billion and distribute it to the areas of the country that need to redevelop and build our infrastructure.
Thank you. Ms. Sample?
Dr. Enoch took some of my thunder from me, so I'm going to echo her sentiments. We need to build bridges, not walls. We have a failing infrastructure. Quite frankly, concrete is raining on the state of Ohio, and we have a $2 billion rainy day fund that's just sitting there. So what we would propose is to take money from the rainy day fund, a bond initiative, and federal funds to fund the rehab and the building of new bridges and streets and roads. We all hit a pothole coming here. I can guarantee you we all hit a pothole. So what do we do to fund those? We can't continue to believe that our residents can pay for this with assessments after assessments after assessments. So I think we tap into that rainy day fund first because it's there, and that's what it should be used for when our state is crumbling right in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley?
You know, I think this is a really critical issue for a state like Ohio. You know, we are at the crossroads of America right here, and in so many jobs, you can look at every community here. We have logistics jobs, we have warehouse jobs, and all those jobs depend on our infrastructure and our highway system. And that's something that built America, our highway system did. And I think that the statistic is something like, you know, every piece of, you know, consumer product that you buy has been on a commercial truck at least 3 times before it reaches you. And, you know, and that's driving all over our highways, up and down 75 and 70. And, you know, we have to make sure that we're doing what we're doing, or what we need to do to protect our infrastructure. And I don't think we should wait until we have a collapse of a bridge that injures somebody. Until, you know, when we have a lot of bridges, whether it's Brent Spence Bridge in Cincinnati or any of our smaller local bridges here that are graded in critical condition, we have to look at how we are protecting, because this becomes a health and safety issue for our citizens. We have to look at how we are maintaining our roads and our bridges, and we have to do a better job. You know, when it comes to funding, you know, if we say that this is a critical issue that we care about as a community and as a state, then I think we have to look at how we are budgeting for our infrastructure and paying for those things, and say that this is a priority that we need to fund at a higher level. You know, traditionally, a lot of these funds have come through the gas tax, and you know, that's something that hasn't been raised in quite some time, and I'm not saying that we need to raise that, but it's something that we should at least bring to our constituents and talk to them about and see what they say. You know, is this something where you would rather pay another couple cents per gallon to have safer roads and safer bridges, or is it not? You know, and that's something I think, again, when we take the politics out of these issues fundamentally come down to safety, they come down to jobs, and they come down to economic development. And we have to do a better job of listening to our constituents and actually just getting these things done.
Thank you. Ms. Axton?
Well, the first thing I'll say is this: cutting military or defense spending is not the way that we're going to fund anything. I have a child who serves currently overseas. For your right to be able to sit up here and to have the conversations that you're having right now. Secondary to that, I will tell you this: we have a multitude of entitlement programs in this state currently that desperately need to be looked at. We are utilizing resources, and we are measuring those who have availability to entitlements based on lack of productivity, and we are depleting a taxpayer base by offering entitlements based on economic stifling. And so those are things that I desperately want to look at and make sure that those who are able-bodied are actually physically working and contributing and paying into the tax base. Those who are not, that we are making sure that those folks are taken care of. But as your senator at the federal level, we will never look at cutting military or defense spending to fund projects related to infrastructure. Please hear me loud and clear on that.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien?
Luckily, as a county commissioner, we work with our county engineer all the time on road and bridge maintenance. When you talk about roads, Miami County has about 425 miles of county roads. The gas tax and the fees that you pay for your registrations help pay for the maintenance of those roads. The gas tax is becoming less and less effective at bringing revenue in for that. So I think that's something that the state has to look into, and I know that ODOT has looked into it several times and have not come up with a good solution yet. In Miami County, we do something where we help out the townships and the villages and the cities. I think the cities do not participate because they have home rule, but the villages and the townships, where they can get in on our bid to pave roads. And it helps out the townships. I don't know if it helps out the villages or not. Matt's looking at me funny. But I think it's just the townships where we help, so they can get a cheaper price to pave those township roads. As far as the bridges, in the 1950s, Ozzie Haddad was the county engineer, and the citizens of Miami County passed something called the bridge levy. We've been able to use those funds since the 50s to leverage federal dollars to maintain and reconstruct bridges all over Miami County, and we have some of the best bridge systems in the nation because of it. I think more and more counties should do that, and we would have a better bridge system. Another item I'd like to look at is the bid threshold in Ohio. I think it's too low. Right now, the bid threshold is at $50,000. You have to bid everything over $50,000. Anything over $75,000, you have to pay prevailing wage. I think the legislature needs to look at increasing both of those things. And I think that would help out local governments to be able to maintain their roads and bridges.
Thank you. Mr. Lovett?
Thanks. On infrastructure, I break it down two ways. We have utilities and we have roads and bridges. On the utility side, you have the vast majority of services being provided by either municipalities or publicly owned utilities. A slice of every utility bill you pay is going towards their ability to keep the infrastructure in place. Moreover, the accountability there is either through elected officials or it's through publicly owned utilities for the vast majority of the services that all Americans get. That's no exception here in Ohio. Those things are all getting regulated and dealt with every day, and if they need to get more money, they can go in the private marketplace, get bonds, get the money, and pay for it. When I was on Tip City Council for 8 years, we have our own electric system. I was the utility guy. I was the guy who was the point person to go to Columbus and Washington to deal with the regulatory issues on that. So I'm pretty confident in saying that on the utility side, we've got ways to deal with the infrastructure problems. But for roads and bridges, we've got two ways to pay for it. It's either through taxes or private user pay like tolls. And one of the things we have to look at in this district and as citizens of this country is how do we want to pay for that? Do we want to continue with the same system where we primarily rely on taxes, or maybe we want to go more towards privatization and get this more out of the government's hands? And by privatization, I mean more tolls. That's not popular. But you know, paying taxes isn't popular either. What we need to do is engage with each other and determine where we think we need to go with this as a country. I would like to see more privatization, more user pay. I think it's more friendly towards the individual who decides to utilize the services, but there is no quick and easy solution on this. We got to work on it together.
Thank you. Mr. Winterig?
I'm surprised nobody's brought this up. Does anybody ever remember those shovel-ready jobs and all those signs we had? I think more money was spent on those signs telling us the roads were getting fixed than the roads were getting fixed. That's where my inherent distrust of the government comes from. They promise us all this stuff and they just spend the money elsewhere. And we're seeing that issue is the federal government right now is mandating more spending, so they're pulling from the states. The states have to fill that gap, so they pull from the local municipalities. And then they're stuck raising taxes and upsetting their citizens when they should have a right to that money that's there. We need to focus on these things that are, particularly from the federal government, these mandates that are coming down, these state mandates that are coming down, and allow our municipalities to determine the best way to spend these funds. The state government can play a role in this in helping facilitate the infrastructure being constructed. If you think about Bill Beagle right now, he's working on something in the state Senate with the 5G infrastructure. And they've done something where they've basically gotten the municipalities together to agree to a compact to allow these 5G, these people constructing the 5G infrastructure to come through these cities to bypass these zoning issues or licenses or whatever else the city determines that they have to do. I thought that was, talking to Senator Beagle, I thought that was an interesting way of addressing this issue and facilitating these companies to create the infrastructure here. Because, you know, I work with the farmers, and a lot of what I hear is, you know, they can't do schoolwork because we don't have any kind of internet infrastructure. And we're actually working with someone right now who privately has put something on top of one of our towers and is getting ready to offer a private way to provide high-speed internet to all the people in these local areas. That's a private solution. If we can facilitate that by getting the government out of the way, all these regulations, these mandated studies, et cetera, let's do it.
Thank you. Ms. Powell?
So we have federal, state, and local government. If we take a look, federal government has become something that it never should have been. It's taken a lot of power away from the state. And unfortunately, on a state level, you have a lot of bureaucrats who are now then taking power away from local. We look at our taxes and regulations, and in the state of Ohio, we have around 248,000 regulations in the state. On average, in every other state, we have around 149,000. So that means in Ohio, we have an extra around 100,000 regulations upon us. If you took pieces of paper and stacked them up, it's 7 feet high of regulations in Ohio. What we know and what we see is that higher regulations, more regulations, means higher taxes. what I would do as a state representative when it comes to infrastructure is I'm going to do everything I can as a state legislator to give power from state back to local. We've seen that Trump has done that on a federal level. He's given power from federal back to states. And now we need to give power back from state back to local. And that's going to be really important. I know Melissa touched on a little bit, but wasteful spending is crazy right now in our state. I will do everything as a state legislator that I can to give power back from state to local, and then sit down with local and talk with them about their needs and how we're going to best spend that money.
Thank you. The next question will deal with finances, and Ms. Powell, you will start. What is your fiscal policy, both in terms of debt and deficit spending and taxes?
Well, we have a huge problem with that. We have a huge problem in our state. Year after year, we continue seeing higher taxes. In Miami County, you're going to talk about, hey, you know, you're the lowest sales tax in the state. But unfortunately, what we see is that we have other taxes upon us that are just fees. So whether it's a fee or whether it's a tax, we are such a highly taxed state. For the business realm, we are in the bottom 11 states in the United States to own a business. What I will do as a state legislator is I will do everything I can to cut taxes, to reduce regulation so that we can see small business thrive, families thrive, and communities thrive.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien?
Thanks for bringing it up, Jenna, but Miami County does have the lowest sales tax rate of any county in the area, and we're proud of that. When the recession hit, we didn't raise taxes to balance the budget. We cut $4 million to balance the budget. So I've done it in real life. It's not a theory. I've done the real thing, and I'm proud of that. Ohio has a constitutional amendment. They cannot have deficit spending, so they have to balance their budget, and they do biannual budgets, so every 2 years it has to balance. If for some reason the revenues are not coming into what were predicted, they have to readjust the budget and cut things. So that constitutional amendment really keeps the legislature in check. It's something I wish our federal government had. I think we'd be much better off. As far as spending goes, as a legislature, you're one of 99, and there's 33 senators. So getting over there, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know how to deal with people. I've been one of those people that Jenna calls a career politician. Even though it's been a local government person, I think I'm a public servant. But having that experience allows me to negotiate. It allows me to understand how the legislature works, understand how to work with folks, and get things done. And that's what I've done my entire career. So I think that, frankly, I'm the most experienced person up here to handle this job as state legislator. And I think all the things I've done as a county commissioner and before that a county recorder qualify me best to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Winterregg?
Shoot, we do have a problem here with our debt, with our spending. Like Commissioner O'Brien over there said, we do have that amendment that mandates that our spending, we don't spend more than we bring in, but the problem is we've got mandates from our federal government that our governor has indulged, like Medicaid expansion that takes 51% right now, I believe, of our budget. We need to get rid of that. We need to open that up and get that money back into the hands of the people. The problem is just we have so many entitlements out there that are sucking us dry. My kid's 17 months old. When he was born, how many, including the federal deficit, I mean, he had $62,000 of debt placed on his back like that. We as a state need to stand up to our federal government and say no to these mandates that they have, because that's our right under the 10th Amendment to do that. I think, you know, we need to send people there to Columbus who, it's real easy to talk about doing things here in conservative Miami County. It's really easy to talk about doing things in areas that are, everybody's like-minded. No one's been through a fight. No one up here has been through a fight with the other side, except for me. I've lived in another country. I've been in academia, and I've stayed fast on my principles. We need to make sure we're sending people up there who understand, we all have this philosophy, but who understand how to use this philosophy and how to use the knowledge of what the other side does in order to push for it.
Thank you. Mr. Lovett?
Thanks. Fiscal debt and taxes. Fortunately, the state does have to keep spending reined in. As Mr. O'Brien pointed out, the state of Ohio has to balance its budget every year. It doesn't have a choice in that matter. I'd love to see a balanced budget amendment at the federal level, Unfortunately, that's beyond the purview of the Ohio State legislator. But what we can do on the state level is continue to make government more efficient. Something you do in private industry as well as government and every other entity on which I've ever served is you're continually reviewing your performance. You're constantly looking at what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And you're constantly trying to find ways to do it better. For example, when I first started practicing law, a fax machine was cutting-edge technology. The VA is the only agency I know of now that still insists on using faxes. What we can do is continually look at how the state of Ohio is going about things, try to introduce technology, try to introduce some common sense proposals that will make us more efficient so we can do things better. And you do that continuously. And if you do it, you make government more efficient, you keep the tax burden down, you don't have to keep raising taxes. The other thing I might point out is I was 8 years a public servant on the Tipp City Council, and I served as mayor for 2 years. We have a 1.5% income tax rate in Tipp City. It's one of the lowest rates for any municipality around. And we have good roads, bridges, fire, police protection. I know how to work within a balanced budget in the government, and I would do that in the legislature as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley?
Yeah, I think prevailing thought is that there are two ways to balance a budget or to increase revenue. You can either increase revenue, which is increasing taxes, or you can cut spending. And I think the other thing that you can look at, besides being more efficient, is looking at increasing your economic output as a state. And that means creating more jobs, creating a more job-friendly environment so that we can bring more businesses in here, so more people are getting put to work, so that they're paying taxes at the same rate that all of us are. And I think that's something. Yes, we have a balanced budget amendment in Ohio, and I think that's a good thing because I think it forces legislators to work together to say, here are the critical priorities that our communities are focused on, that we have to fund, that we have to protect. And there are certain things that government does that it has to do, and that's what we should be funding. I think that we look at our tax rate and our budget in Ohio, and the thing that makes me uncomfortable with how we've balanced the budget over the past several years is that we've cut so much of the money that we've been giving back to local governments, that local government fund. And frankly, when I think about how tax revenue should be spent, I think that money should be decided by local communities. And it's easier to balance a budget when you're just basically removing money from your local governments than it is from saying, here are the critical things in our own, on a state level that we're doing that we need to focus on, and things that we could be doing to be more efficient. Every single community in the state of Ohio has felt this crunch. That's why you've seen so many levies going on, school board levies, city levies. Everybody's talking about levies, it feels like. And that's raising everybody's taxes too, just community by community. And it's passing the buck from the state level to the community level. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think we should be balancing our budget on the backs of our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sample?
I think that first I want to say that I don't think there should be a tax increase at all. We need to find another way. Quite frankly, I don't think any Ohioan could withstand a tax increase or more assessments on them. We have people who are living paycheck to paycheck trying to get by, and to say we're going to raise taxes, I just don't think this is the time for that. Whether on a federal or state level, we must work together, regardless of party affiliation. If you're going there to represent people with people in mind, it has to be about people and not about party. And when we talk about, of course, in Ohio, you have to balance the budget, but we also need to make sure while we're balancing that budget that we're not gutting services that are much needed here in the state of Ohio. We've gutted mental health services and substance abuse services. So yes, we balance it, but we need to make sure that we're not putting our community at risk when doing that. So I think that's very important, but we have to really watch trying to raise taxes on our residents. They can't afford it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Guyette?
Starve the beast. That's the Republican mantra. Recently Republicans in Congress, with no input from Democrats along with Donald Trump, passed a massive tax cut. It was not tax reform, it was a tax cut. And 86% of the benefits went to the wealthiest people and big corporations in our country. It's true the rest of us will see a little bit of relief, but very little. They always tell us, We'll cut taxes, we'll have even more money in the Treasury because it'll create so much growth. You won't have to pay for anything. Everything's going to be free. Well, the Congressional Budget Office just released their updated forecast, $1 trillion annual deficits into the foreseeable future. Now they throw up their hands and they say, oh my God, debt and deficits, what a problem. Let's pass a balanced budget amendment, because they want to go after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. These are programs that the vast middle class in this country relies on. These are our social safety net that our ancestors and generations before us put in place for when we needed a hand up. So I think we need to get our house in order. Republicans used to be the party of fiscal restraint. They used to lecture us Democrats night and day about spending and programs that we were trying to gain votes. Now they do tax cuts to do the same thing. A tax cut is a giveaway of a different kind than a program. We need to get our fiscal house in order. I think infrastructure is a good way to do it. And I would update what I said earlier about the military. We have 800 military bases in 80 countries. We have 138,000 soldiers stationed overseas. We're not defending the United States. We're defending global capitalism that we don't even get tax revenue from. That's where the equation needs to change.
Thank you. Dr. Enoch?
First of all, I would make sure that everyone's paying their fair share. The Congressional Budget Office, I believe they said that this administration just added $3.1 billion to our federal deficit, or I'm sorry, our national debt through this horrible tax plan. Essentially what you got in this tax plan was about a cup of coffee every week. And for the next 7 to 8 years, Starbucks, I drink Starbucks. I saw some faces over there. For the next 8 years, they're going to take back a half a cup of coffee every year. And then about 8 years from now, that tax break you receive all goes away, except for the tax break and tax cuts for the wealthy. The wealthy 1% in about 8 years are the only ones who will see a benefit from the tax cuts that just happened this year. Ultimately, we need to, and then as, Mr. Guyette said, then they move to balance the budget. I think that we need to have individuals who are in Washington who will make fiscal decisions, responsible fiscal decisions that benefit the rest of us and not just the 1%. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Thank you. I'd have to agree with everybody else that what they were saying. The way you control your budget is through what you spend. When I was in industry, that's one of the things that we were looking at all the time. Where was our money going? What were we spending it on? Are we getting good value for what we're paying for? And I think that's the way the government should approach it. We can't keep doing or funding projects or coming up with projects and not funding them. We've been in, Iraq for I don't know how long? 17 years. That is a huge tax on our ability to fund our government. Yeah, we have to ensure our world or our society, our way of life, our threat to our country. I've served in the military, so I understand that very well. But there's things that we can do. We can look at different aspects of government. Ronald Reagan once said, government's the problem. I believe if we go back in and look through the government, see where our money is going, we can make some savings, and hopefully we can balance the budget. That would be my goal anyway. Get a control on spending. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Axon?
Well, at the federal level, I came out as a opponent of the recent omnibus spending bill. And I'll tell you this from a bipartisan standpoint, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, your legislators let you down on that entire travesty that happened. Pet projects were rolled into the omnibus spending bill. There was no transparency with that. It didn't just come from the Republicans. It didn't just come from the Democrats. That was a reckless spending bill that was pushed through. So that's something we should all be able to agree upon. We are literally $20 trillion in debt right now in this country. And all that bill did was extend things out for another 1.3. Every time I hear people discuss the CBO scores, it's almost laughable because it is consistently found to be a flawed system used by legislators to try to justify reckless spending. I will tell you right now that I am not a proponent of increasing taxes. I am not a proponent of pet projects being rolled into ridiculous bills that we can't tell where our money is going. And I would demand full disclosure and full transparency so that we can see where these projects are going and we can see where our taxpayer-funded dollars are going. Those things aren't happening right now. We are living in times of unsustainability. And you can thank both the House and the Senate Democrats and Republicans for where we are today. There's very little difference these days when it comes to establishment politics. It's a game of division and distraction to keep us divided, to keep us frustrated with one another, and to make sure that legislation that's meaningful to you and meaningful to me doesn't get pushed through.
Thank you. Our final question for this evening will deal with the political climate. However, first we would like to take this opportunity to thank each of the candidates for attending tonight's Meet the Candidate. It was very enlightening, and we really appreciate each of you accepting our invitation and taking this opportunity to share your position with us on a variety of topics. Good luck to each of you this coming election. Our final question today deals with today's political climate, and we would like you to briefly answer the question and also take this final opportunity to share with the voters those last things which you would like them to know about you. Dr. Enoch, you will start this question. In today's political climate, do you believe that we as a nation, state, or community are divided or together? And how will you conduct yourself when you hold office?
I definitely believe that as a nation we are divided. It's very troubling that we're so divided. I woke up one day last year and had stepped into the 1950s. The same rights that we were fighting for back in the 1950s for women, for minorities, African Americans, for the poor, we're fighting for those same rights now. And I think that the most important thing that needs to happen with anyone who goes to Congress is that we need to be able to listen to both sides. We need to listen and we need to come to an agreement as opposed to closing our ears to what the other side is saying. That's absolutely what I intend to do as a U.S. Congressperson. And in closing, I first of all want to say that I ran for U.S. Congress because I believe that we're better. We're a better nation than what we're seeing in Washington right now. We're better than the politics that we're seeing. I think that the majority of Americans have been left behind for the political establishment. And I think that it's time that the 8th District send a woman to U.S. Congress. I would be the first woman to ever hold office, a congressional office in this district. And it matters. Women's issues and children's issues impact us all. We all have children, we all have mothers, sisters, wives, and those issues are being ignored on the floor in Washington, D.C. And I hope that when you go to the polls on May 8th, those of you who take a Democratic ballot, that you'll vote for me, Dr. Vanessa Enoch, or Doc Enoch, it's easier to remember. Vote for me in the Democratic primary. And then in November, that you would vote for me for U.S. Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
We're facing a time like no other in our history. Government is busy concentrating wealth and the power in the hands of few, and yet they keep asking voters of all parties to keep voting against their best interest. Working families are going to be faced with many issues and how to deal with them. Medicare, Medicaid, the ACA, insurance costs associated with all of those programs, issues dealing with the cost of drug addiction and how we're going to get well again. Will Social Security retirement fund be secure for the future? Issues like how are we going to keep our children safe from gun violence in our schools? Issues related to improving our children's overall education, finding ways to deal with higher cost of college education, and dealing with the excessive cost of student debt that comes with it. I can offer solutions for those questions. I want to work with you in Congress to address those concerns and issues that interest you. Our current representative has chosen not to work on your behalf, but rather for special interest groups, corporations, and Wall Street. His objectives are clear, and that is to continue to help his congressional colleagues to consolidate the nation's wealth into the hands of the wealthiest of our nation. I want to return responsible government to the hands of the working men and women in our district. I'm experienced in dealing with public issues, and I'm experienced in managing business operations. I know how to bring people together, and I know how to solve problems. My name is Ted Jones, and I'm asking for your vote and your support on May 8th. And I just ask you to remember this. If Alabama can send Jones to the Congress, I hope Ohio can do it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Guyette?
You know, compromise is not a dirty word. And a couple of elections ago, it almost became a dirty word. People wanted representatives to go to Washington and dig in their heels, you know, and then people wonder why Washington doesn't work. I believe that each person who represents us has to have strong opinions, has to have principles, has to have integrity. You have to operate from that place. But at the same time, you have to understand that other people may have a different perspective. And though I disagree with many of my friends over here on the Republican side, I've spent most of my life working with Republicans. I live in Greenville, where I'm surrounded by Republicans. Many of my friends are Republican. And I have a lot of respect for traditional Republican values like fiscal restraint, family values, and rule of law. Unfortunately, recently we've seen the Republican Party lose its bearings. We have a president who flouts the rule of law and democratic norms. His businesses enrich him at the public trough. He has members of his cabinet who are engaging in self-dealing. And meanwhile, Congress turns a blind eye. They don't want to hear anything about it. They want to investigate the investigators in the FBI and the Justice Department because the investigations are inconvenient politically. I never thought I would see this day in my life. You know, I'm a lifelong Democrat, started voting in 1980, disagreed with the Republicans over the years on a lot of different things, but I always had respect for them because they always emphasized the importance of the Constitution and the rule of law. But they're away without leave at Congress, and I'm really disappointed in this, and this is why I'm running this year. Donald Trump is not on the ballot, but every single member of the House of Representatives is, and I would like to I believe Warren Davidson is a good man with an impressive resume, but I think he's over his head, and he's gotten caught up in the party politics of Washington. So I want to go to Washington, bring some oversight to the executive and the administration, and bring back the rule of law.
Thank you. Ms. Sample?
Are we divided in today's political climate? I would have to say, unfortunately, yes, we are. But how can we fix it? I think it's fixable. I think each and every one of us who sit up here on the podium this evening feel that we are a part of that system that needs to be fixed. And we all bring something to the table that we believe will fix it. But I think you first have to keep the focus on the people. And it always has to be about people first. People have to be over party. You know, we have a system now that seems to believe that party is more important than people, and that's unfortunate, and it should never be like that. When we elect the representatives to go out and represent us, it should always be about them first. And so now we have a system where it's about who your donors are. and who the corporate donors are, and it should never be like that. So I truly believe that Congressman Dennis Kucinich and I, we will fix those issues that our citizens of the state of Ohio are having. We have to get rid of the corruption. We have to get rid of this pay-to-play system, and I think that we absolutely will do that. And so I implore you all to log on to Kucinich.com, look at our platform. Our platform was built by Dennis and I together. It wasn't something that he just gave to me and said, this is what we're going to do. And we built that platform by going out across the state of Ohio and talking to residents, Democrats, Republicans, independents, because that's what it has to be about. It has to be about people. And if it's not about people, then why are we here? So I encourage you all to think about us on Tuesday, May the 8th, when you go and cast your ballot. And again, log on to Kucinich.com to learn more about our platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson?
Well, I'll say this, guys. I came specifically tonight because I knew that there would be a room full of Democrats and a room full of Republicans, and I wanted to make a public declaration of bipartisanship and resolve to be in Washington, because one thing we can agree on, statesmen, or in my case, a stateswoman, going to Washington to represent our interests is of critical importance. I need for you to think independently, not on the Republican ticket, not on the Democratic ticket, but who will serve the interests of the people first and foremost. I may not be the fanciest thing in the world. I'm a mom of 4. I've worked incredibly hard for everything I have, but I am principled and I am dedicated to the people. The only folks that funded my campaign are the Ohio voter, and they are from all sides of the aisle, despite the fact that I'm very conservative. I have the same kids supporting me and working on my campaign that were supporting me in the 5th grade when I ran for the first school president and set up the Republic clear back then. We're from all walks of life, we're from all political backgrounds, and we have the will and the desire to create a political climate where we run on skill and ability, not based on political connectivity and the wealth in our pockets. We have the ability to actually have a revolutionary time in our country right now. If you are willing to look at me for the woman that I am, the only Republican Senate candidate on the Republican ticket who showed up to be here with you tonight, no fear at all, I hope this shows you what I would be like in Washington, and that I would represent you in the same way. Fearless, unapologetically, and for the people. God bless you.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley.
Thank you. I might not have another chance to do this, so when we finish, can I bang this gavel? I've always wanted to do that. You know, I think the easy answer to this question is to say we are more divided right now. I think that's the easy answer, because it's what you see in the news, it's what you hear on the radio, it's what you read in the newspaper. But I think, to me, and some people have called me naive, but to me the true answer is that you look at this room and you see the people who are engaged, the people who care about all of these races, the people who care about their communities. And the people who have said, enough is enough, you know, we don't care if you're a Republican, we don't care if you're a Democrat, we want to see what results you're going to provide for our community and for us, what you're going to get done. You know, the rhetoric that we've heard for so long, whether it's in D.C. or in Columbus, I think people are getting tired of it. I think people want legislators and representatives who are going to represent them, who are going to listen to them, who are going to work for them. And to me, you know, I feel like we're at this tipping point now, and it's exciting to me, because I see people who are energized, I see people who are engaged, we're knocking on doors, we're talking to voters, people are excited to hear about the content of your character, not just about the party you represent. And to me, that signals that we're turning the corner here in our political discourse and our dialogue, and I think that we are becoming more connected and more united than we ever have before. And I think, you know, I'd have to thank our moderator as well, too, because we're seeing more and more young people who are getting excited and who are getting engaged in government and in the political process. And I think that's a fantastic thing. Again, it doesn't matter which side of the party or spectrum that you might be falling on. I think we're seeing people who care about their community and who want to fight for their community. You know, I've been married now, not as long as anyone up here, but for about 6 months. And so thank you. And that was by far the best decision I made. And why? And I got a lot to learn still, trust me. But the reason I bring that up is because I'm starting a family. I'm preparing to start my family here in this community, and more than anything, I want to represent this community well. I want to listen to you. I want to hear you. I want to be present, and I want to represent you in Columbus. I don't have a primary in May, so I'm lucky. And you know, for some of you, maybe unfortunately, you'll see me in November. But I'm excited to represent all of you, no matter where you come from or what you believe in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lovett?
I'm George Lovett. I'm running for state representative, and I'd like to thank all of you that are watching and all of you that came here tonight and our organizers who put on this event. I don't think we're more divided than what we've been before. If you've ever seen some of the political cartoons about Abraham Lincoln and our founding fathers, they were pretty gritty. I think the internet gives us a lot more and gives it to us faster. We're more aware of it. Free speech, public debate, is one of the things that makes our country great, and it keeps us all accountable, and it keeps us all fresh and healthy and exchanging ideas that we need to make our country even better than it is right now. What we need to do for state representative is elect a conservative, proven problem solver with plenty of non-governmental experience. I grew up selling minnows and worms starting at the age of 8, and I haven't stopped working since. I've had my own law firm for almost 30 years, and I've created plenty of good-paying jobs and helped thousands of clients. I know how to create jobs and solve problems. I spent 8 years on Tip City Council, 2 of those as mayor. I've served on over a dozen nonprofits. I am a very well-rounded conservative problem solver with plenty of non-governmental experience. What we need to do is continue working on government to make it more efficient, make it smaller, and make it take less out of our pockets. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-Second Amendment. Faith and hard work are my foundation and values. Faith and hard work are your values. I want to take those values to Columbus to be your state representative. I'd love to have your vote on May 8th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Winterregg.
First and foremost, thank you all for coming out tonight, giving me this opportunity to kind of show you who I am. Abby, thank you for moderating. You're better spoken than I am. And then I hope you continue on in doing all this. But to answer your question, yeah, we're absolutely divided. Our country is divided. We've got 2 schools of thought here. We've got one school of thought that believes they know what's best for us, and they're the arbiters of justice and everything good for us. And we've got a school of thought here of we believe for ourselves we know what's best, and that should be left to us. And, you know, I think we've sent people to Columbus who have lost sight of this. They'll campaign like conservatives, and they go there, and they end up acting like Democrats. And that's hugely problematic. That's how we got Medicaid expansion. That's how we've got this governor who's just out of control and off the deep end, not supporting anything that are my values. You know, we can't continue sending people to Columbus who are that way. Career politicians, lawyers. No offense, you guys are nice, but that's not what I want. You know, I've spent time in academia. I know what the other side's doing. I know what's coming down the pike, and we need to send someone there who can fight, who understands how to stand up for our values, because we haven't had anybody there who's done that. And I intend to go there and show and model what that looks like. But man, it's going to be an uphill battle. I'm ready for the fight, and I hope you guys realize this is a serious thing. There's a lot of politics involved with running for office, with being in office. That needs to go away. We need people there who are principled, who are devoted to our values, and that's why I'm asking you to send me there to Columbus. Please vote for me on May 8th. And if you have any questions, I'll talk to you afterwards. But thanks again for coming out. I've appreciated this, and y'all are great.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien?
Thanks, Abby. Great question on the climate. Mr. Lovett is using a story that came out 4 years ago that was false then and is false now. It was released by supporters of my opponent in the Republican primary 30 days before the election. So I'll leave it up to you to decide why it was released and why those people said those things. It was false then and it's false now. There's a super PAC doing the same thing. All indications support and show that they're supporting Jenna. So folks, the political bosses in Columbus will not stop. They don't want me there. They know I won't do their bidding for them. I'll go over there and represent everybody in Miami and Darke County, so I represent. And just to prove that, I'm going to tell you a little story. In 2000, after the census was released, Miami County went over 100,000 in population. And the Ohio Revised Code says that when your population goes over 100,000, you have a new elected position called the municipal court clerk. And the municipal court clerk makes 85% of what a judge makes. In Miami County, that would have been over $98,000. I had some folks who wanted me to do that, so I filed for it. I was completely unopposed. It was my job. A friend of mine from Wayne County said, you need to look at the revised code. You can combine that with the common police clerk. So I read the revised code, looked at it, they were correct. So with Dick Adams, who was our state representative at the time, I had him introduce legislation to combine that job with the common police clerk of courts. We got it passed through the House, through the Senate, and the governor signed it. The interesting part of that is $98,000 was over $30,000 more than I make as a county commissioner. I ask you, who else would have done that? Because I've talked to many people who said you were nuts for doing it. But I did it because it was the best thing to do for the taxpayers. It would have saved the taxpayers over $120,000 in salary and benefits. Not over, it did, because we did it. Folks, I've tested during good times and bad times. I've balanced budgets. I've kept taxes low. I'm ready to go to Columbus to fight for each and every one of you and the values that we hold dear here in Miami and Darke counties. I hope you vote for me on May 8th in the Republican primary.
Thank you. Ms. Powell?
So to begin with, Abby, thank you so much. You've done a wonderful job, and thank you guys all for coming out this evening. Political climate. I believe that the media has totally skewed where people really are. I've talked to hundreds of voters in our community, and you know what? All of them get behind this message. They get behind a message of protecting life from conception to natural death. They get behind a thought of reducing taxes, cutting regulations. They get behind a path that says, you know what, business owners, communities, you know, we need to give power back from state back to local. I was born and raised on a farm in southern Darke County. My grandfather has farmed the same ground for over 60 years. My dad has farmed. My brother now farms. I've never ran for office before. I've never been in politics before, but I own a business. I've fought against local and state government every step of the way. And you know what? I'm excited about going to Columbus and fighting for our community in the same way that I fought for our business. So if you guys would like, you can follow us at Jenna Powell for State Rep on Facebook. I have events probably 2 to 4 times a week inviting everyone out to coffee so that I can get to know each and every one of you, because it's a government for the people, by the people. And I want to hear your heart of why you care about our community and what we can do on a state level to help our community thrive. So thank you all for coming. I would love your vote on May 8th for Jenna Powell, and please reach out to me at any time, and I'd love to answer any questions. So thank you all.
Thank you. On behalf of the people of Union Township and the village of West Milton, thank you all for joining us tonight and sharing your beliefs and thoughts. Good luck to you guys this May. Everyone, please have a good evening.